Welcome back to These Things Are Written on this Thursday as we begin Galatians chapter 2. As Paul continues to tell his story, but now gets in a little bit more of the heart of the matter, as we're going to see the problem coming up in the next couple readings that we do. We're going to read from Galatians 2, verse 1 through verse 14. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus along with me. I went up because of a revelation and set before them, though privately before those who seemed influential, the gospel that I proclaim among the Gentiles, in order to make sure that I was not running or had not run in vain. But even Titus, who was with me, was not forced to be circumcised, even though he was a Greek. Yet because a false brother secretly brought in, who slipped in to spy out our freedom that we have in Christ Jesus, so that they might bring us into slavery. To them we did not yield in submission even for a moment, so that the truth of the gospel might be presented to you. And from those who seem to be influential, what they were makes no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Those, I say, who seemed influential added nothing to me. On the contrary, when they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel to the circumcised, for he who worked through Peter for his apostolic ministry to the circumcised worked also through me for mine to the Gentiles. And when James and Cephas and John, who seemed to be pillars, perceived the grace that was given me, they gave the right hand of fellowship to Barnabas and me, that we should go to the Gentiles and they to the circumcised. Only they asked us to remember the poor, the very thing I was eager to do. But when Cephas came to Antioch, I opposed him face to face because he stood condemned. For before certain men came from James, he was eating with the Gentiles, but when they came, he drew back and separated himself, fearing the circumcision party. And the rest of the Jews acted hypocritically along with him, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that their conduct was not in step with the truth of the gospel, I said to Cephas before them all, if you, though a Jew, live like a Gentile and not like a Jew, how can you force the Gentiles to live like Jews? All right, this is getting to the heart of it. But before we do, we're going to talk about the Jerusalem Council, where the second time that Paul went to Jerusalem, when he visited them before he went on his mission trip. 14 years, he says, after 14 years. This is 14 years from his conversion, from the time that God had began his work in him. So not 17 years, not adding another 3 years to it that he was in Arabia, but the 14 years includes that time. The false brothers we see in verse 4, to spy out our freedom. That begins to show the crack that's kind of forming in this understanding. And it shows the problem. And the problem is this, that they were adding things to the gospel, or they were questioning how a Gentile could be a Christian. But he did not yield. The gospel message for the people, for the Galatians, was preserved. The influential people, and notice how he makes sure they all understand that Paul doesn't care about position or authority. Paul knows that it is God who has given him this message, and God will continue to guide him as well. Those who seem to be influential, Peter, James, and John, again, James, the brother of the Lord, accepted him. But yet that acceptance that was given, kind of as an apostle, is being tested, isn't it? In verse 11, we read of Peter's visit. Now, this is not in the book of Acts. It's guessed that this was shortly afterwards so that Peter could kind of see how this ministry to the Gentiles was going, maybe talk to the Jews there as well. But what happened is that Peter, when people from James came, he started to sit with them, with the Jews and not with the Gentiles. Again, Jews and Gentiles wouldn't have mixed. But the Jewish Christians were acting that way as well, that they were set apart from the Gentile Christians. This shouldn't surprise us, should it? This is often the way human nature works. Human nature likes to be with those like us. Human nature also leads us into hypocrisy. That we're talking to someone and we're friends with them until someone more important comes along, and then we might befriend them. I know that sounds really junior high-ish, doesn't it? But yet that's often how we see adults work. Maybe they're friends with their Christian friends, or with their outsider friends. But when their Christian friends come around, then they don't seem to do as much with them because they don't want to look bad for the others. Paul confronted this because it's all about the gospel. If you're setting barriers between Gentiles and Jews, between what they each believe, if we're setting that up, then the gospel is meaningless. You see, because what the people from James were saying is that in order to become Christian, you needed to become Jew first. You needed to be circumcised first. That's what we see a little bit later on. And this was leading in that direction. But Paul confronts Peter face to face. Now, we use that phrase, in his face, to kind of show a little bit of anger, right? This, I don't think, was anger, but just calling him out in love over what Peter was doing, the way we all should work. When we have a disagreement with others, when we see someone doing something that isn't right, call them out, talk to them in love. Tomorrow we'll come back and join again. We'll continue with chapter 2, and we'll see a little bit more. Paul gets into a logical argument to help understand what's going on here. We'll talk about that tomorrow. God bless.